This is the story of Martha, a widow who took down her HOA using a single forgotten document. They threatened to foreclose on a single mother while I was away, so I had the county void their entire 1990 master deed. I've lived in Oak Ridge Estates for 28 years. I moved here when the oaks were just saplings, and the neighborhood felt like a promise of quiet safety. Since my husband passed, that quiet has become my lifeline. I don't ask for much. I keep my lawn edged, my shutters painted a muted forest mist, and I pay my dues 2 weeks early, every single time. I was in Vermont for 3 weeks, helping my sister through surgery. I didn't check my mail. I didn't even look at my phone. But the moment I pulled into my driveway last Tuesday, I knew the peace had been shattered. Sarah, my neighbor from 2 doors down, was sitting on her porch steps. She's 26, working 2 jobs to keep her toddler in a good school district. Usually, she's the personification of making it work. That afternoon, she looked like a ghost. She walked over to my car before I could even kill the engine. Her hands were shaking as she handed me a notice of intent to foreclose. It wasn't from a bank. It was from the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. While I was gone, the board had pushed through a $4,000 special assessment for a clubhouse renovation Sarah couldn't afford. When she begged for a payment plan, they didn't just say no. They accelerated her fines and filed a lien on her only asset. "I have 30 days, Martha," she whispered. Her voice was thin, dehydrated of hope. "Evelyn told me that if they make an exception for me, the social fabric of the neighborhood would unravel." The injustice felt cold, like a draft through a window you thought was locked. I looked at that legal paper and realized that for Evelyn, the HOA president, this wasn't about the money. It was about seeing how much a person could break before they stopped trying to fix things. And she was just getting started. The pressure didn't come with a shout. It arrived in a crisp, cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by Evelyn, the HOA president. Evelyn is the kind of woman who treats community standards like a holy text and a designer silk scarf like a uniform. She doesn't raise her voice, she raises her eyebrows. "Martha, welcome back," she said, standing on my porch the morning after I returned. She held a clipboard like a shield. "I saw you speaking with Sarah. I know you're a compassionate woman, but we have to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. If we allow one homeowner to ignore a special assessment, the property values for everyone, including you, begin to slide. It's a domino effect." I told her Sarah wasn't ignoring it. She was asking for time. I told her her daughter was 3 years old. Evelyn offered a thin, practiced smile that stayed strictly on her lips. "The bylaws are quite clear, Martha. Section 4, paragraph B. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the collective. My hands are tied by the rules we all agreed to." Then the screws started turning on me. Over the next week, the notices poured in. I received a courtesy warning for a single dandelion in my flower bed, one that had sprouted while I was in Vermont. Then came a $75 fine for leaving my trash cans out 4 hours past the pickup window. Evelyn was making it clear. If I stood by Sarah, I was standing in the path of the machine. I watched Sarah from my kitchen window. She was packing boxes. Not because she had been evicted yet, but because the stress of the looming foreclosure was eating her alive. She couldn't sleep, and she couldn't fight a board led by a woman who viewed empathy as a structural weakness. The board held a town hall on Thursday. I sat in the back, silent. I watched Evelyn dismiss Sarah's soft-spoken plea for a grace period with a wave of her manicured hand. "We aren't a charity, Sarah. We're a corporation." As I walked out, Evelyn caught my eye and gave me a small, victorious nod. They expected me to give up. They expected Sarah to vanish. They truly believed that because they held the gavel, they owned the room. I spent the next 3 days in my basement, surrounded by the scent of old paper and cedar. My late husband, Arthur, hadn't just kept records. He had archived our life with the precision of a man who didn't trust anything he couldn't verify. I pulled out a heavy plastic bin labeled Closing Documents, 1990, 1998. I wasn't looking for a miracle. I was looking for a crack, a single loose stone in the fortress Evelyn had built around herself. I spent hours cross-referencing our original deed with the 120-page Master Declaration of Covenants that the HOA used as their primary weapon. My eyes burned under the flickering fluorescent light. Every time I found a clause that seemed helpful, a sub-clause on the next page snatched it away. By Saturday morning, I was ready to quit. I felt like a fool, a retired librarian trying to outmaneuver a woman with a $20,000 legal retainer and a heart made of limestone. I even picked up the phone to call Sarah, planning to tell her I'd pay her assessment myself, even though I knew Evelyn would just find a new reason to fine her once she smelled blood in the water. Then, I saw it. Tucked into the very back of my original title insurance packet was a yellowed carbon copy letter from the county recorder's office dated August 14th, 1990. It was a mundane notice of deficiency addressed to the neighborhood's original developer. Notice of deficiency, recording serial 904421. Serial 904421 was the master deed, the very foundation of the HOA's existence. The letter stated that the developer had failed to include the mandatory Attachment C, legal metes and bounds required by the State Residential Act. According to the notice, the developer had exactly 90 days to refile the corrected document, or the recording would be considered provisional and voidable by law. My heart did a strange rhythmic skip. I grabbed my keys and drove to the county clerk's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I sat at a grainy computer terminal for 4 hours, tracing every amendment to that serial number. I searched for a refill. I searched for a curative affidavit. There was nothing. The developer had gone bankrupt in 1991. The bank that took over the remaining lots never checked the paperwork. For 36 years, the Oak Ridge HOA had been operating under a master deed that had technically expired before Sarah was even born. I printed the documents, my hands finally steady. Evelyn thought she was a CEO. She didn't realize she was the president of a ghost. The HOA's monthly board meeting was held in the community center basement, a room that smelled of floor wax and overbrewed coffee. Evelyn sat at the center of the folding table, her posture perfect, her eyes scanning a delinquency report as if it were a list of casualties. Sarah wasn't there. She was at home, probably taping the last of her boxes. I didn't wait for the public comment period. I walked straight to the front and laid a small manila folder directly on top of Evelyn's color-coded agenda. Martha. "We are in the middle of a closed session," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into that tone of performative patience she used for difficult seniors. "If this is about Sarah, we've already discussed the finality of the master deed. It is the law of the land here." I looked at her, then at the two men flanking her who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. I felt a strange, quiet calm. "That's exactly what I'm here to talk about, Evelyn. The law of the land." I opened the folder and slid the 1990 county recorder's notice across the table, followed by the certified title search I'd pulled that morning. Evelyn frowned, her manicured finger tracing the voidable stamp on the 1990 filing. The room went silent. Here is what they didn't know. I pointed to the missing Attachment C. The developer never filed the legal metes and bounds. Under the 1989 State Residential Act, any master deed missing this description is legally non-binding unless cured within 90 days. That deadline passed 5 years ago. This HOA isn't a legal entity, it's a social club with no power to levy fines, no power to place liens, and absolutely no power to foreclose on a single mother's home. The blood drained from Evelyn's face, leaving her foundation looking like a mask. She looked at the paper, then at me, her mouth opening and closing. This is a clerical technicality. We've been a functioning board for decades. Operating illegally, I corrected her softly. I've already filed the affidavit of non-compliance with the county clerk. As of 2 p.m. today, your master deed is officially voided on the public record. Every fine you've collected in the last 7 years is now a personal liability for this board. And Sarah's lien? It never existed. Evelyn reached for her gavel, but her hand was shaking too hard to pick it up. The machine hadn't just jammed, it had evaporated. The fallout was quiet, just as I'd hoped. There were no sirens, no shouting matches on the lawn, and no dramatic arrests. Instead, there was a series of very long, very expensive meetings between the HOA's insurance carrier and a team of panicked county attorneys. By the end of the month, the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association had effectively ceased to exist as a governing body. Because the master deed was void, their right to collect dues or enforce forest mist paint colors vanished overnight. The lien against Sarah's house was struck from the record by a court order, and the board was forced to use their remaining treasury to refund every fine they had collected over the last 3 years to avoid a massive class action lawsuit. Sarah didn't move. I watched from my porch as she unpacked the boxes she'd taped shut just weeks before. She came over that evening with a small plate of cookies and cried on my shoulder for 10 minutes. She didn't have to say anything. The relief in her eyes was enough. Evelyn resigned a week later. I see her sometimes, walking her dog. She doesn't look at my flower beds anymore, and she certainly doesn't look at me. She looks at the ground, a woman whose kingdom turned out to be built on a clerical error. I still keep my lawn edged and my shutters painted. I do it because I like it, not because a piece of paper tells me I have to. The neighborhood is still quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet now, one that feels like freedom instead of fear. The records were always there, tucked away in a dusty basement, waiting for someone to look. It makes me wonder about all the other rules we follow simply because someone speaks them with enough authority. How long would you have stayed silent? If you enjoyed seeing the law of the land crumble under a single dusty document, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another HOA takedown. Help us reach more homeowners by liking this video, because sometimes the best way to fight a bully is simply to read the fine print.